Well, hello and happy New Year, everybody. Um, my name is Michelle Mattingly, and I have the privilege of practicing naturopathic and Chinese medicine. If you didn't know, this is about my 18th year of practice, and I am so fortunate to get to live in Central Oregon and work with a lot of very healthy people, but also people who, struggle with various conditions that our silly bodies can bring to the surface. I work with a lot of active and fit individuals, but also with people with, debilitating issues, pain and chronic disease and metabolic function issues and hormone health, especially. I see a lot of that these days. But one of the things I just wanted to hop on here quickly and discuss today, because it is the new year, and it's a very common practice, as all of us know, to make resolutions and work on some things that we want to change. And I commend everybody for trying to do that, and I think it's a good endeavor. It's always nice to have a fresh start, although I think we pretty much have them every single day. But the year certainly can symbolize, just taking some steps to make changes and improve our health, of course, and improve our relationships, our finances, and prosperity, of course, digestive health, various other things that people like to implement this time of year. But one of the things I wanted to focus on, and this is somewhat symbolic because it has been 3 years since I gave up alcohol, and I wanted to talk about making changes that are centered around addictions. And of course, when we hear that word, it can be kind of a trigger word for a lot of people, and can mean something bigger than it does for certain people as well. Because I think there's a lot of things that become ingrained in us as patterns of behavior. And so addiction can go much beyond just the substance itself or the activity itself. Of course, there's lots of different forms of addiction. But what I want to talk about a little bit is kind of the roots of why these behaviors become a problem for us, and kind of more of the esoteric and ethereal thoughts on some of the problems with addiction and other habits that, aren't quite addictions or not nearly as devastating potentially, but can create problems in us reaching our goals and moving in a direction that is new. So, one of the things about changing habits, and I'm going to kind of lighten it to there, that can be really challenging, is to just honestly and objectively, which is hard, take a look at your relationship of that behavior to that behavior. So, for example, with alcohol, I'll just kind of come back to that because I can speak to it personally. Why are we using it? What is our connection to it? What is our pattern with it? Some people say, "Oh, I'm a social drinker." And what is that about? Maybe it's as simple as, you're a bit of an introvert, and so when you have a drink, when you're out with people, you feel a little more loose and bubbly and, able to converse and have a little more fun. But that's an important thing to look at, because the underlying issue is really about potentially some self-worth, some insecurities, other things like that that are harder to kind of see through. It's like, oh, it's easy, it's more fun. Sure, but what is the real underlying kind of shadow work that you need to look at when you're using a substance, in this case, to kind of help you with something within you that is challenging? What one of the other things that I like to think about with that relationship with a behavior is, what is the real pattern? Because it's easy, and I'll go back to the alcohol thing, but I think this is very true for food and other things that kind of stimulate us in our emotional systems. What is the pattern? Is it actually something that you do regularly? And these are like kind of brutally honest questions that we have to sit with ourselves on. Is it something you do regularly? Is it something that you need in order to to feel a certain way. I hear that a lot with alcohol in particular, or weed, or whatever else people use, that this is the way I can relax, or this is kind of a reward for a hard day, or maybe it's a reward for a good day. It becomes this self-soothing, habit that we feel like we somehow need. And then that relationship with it becomes easy to justify. And that's the real story here. Because we really have to understand, what are those things that we're trying to fill? Is it a void within us? Was there some trauma? That's often the case within us. And again, this, you can fill in the blank for food, for other substances, alcohol, even scrolling or playing games or porn or whatever else. There's lots of different things that we as humans use as kind of filling the void. And in addition to that, there's a lot of times that we use these habits for avoidance. So it's like, what are we missing? But then also, what are we trying to avoid? Whether that's numbing out pain or trauma or boredom. That's a pretty common one, especially nowadays. We get so much stimulus all the time, and so it's easy to fill those voids and those downtimes with a little bit of stimulus, whatever that might be, because we're used to getting that kind of dopamine hit all the time. Is it a desire for pleasure because we're missing out on those deeper connections in our lives? Or we've kind of, we don't have that stimulus from our work, for example, and so we try and fill that void, and bring it in a different way, get those dopamine hits, that serotonin stimulus. I think, when we distill it down, and I'm not trying to make any of this sound trite, because I honor and really recognize the challenges that people go through with serious addictions. It's not an easy thing to overcome. And so I'm not saying that, this is simple by any means. But I think that we definitely need to, when we're thinking about breaking some patterns, changing the way we do things, starting fresh with our behaviors and our tendencies, we really have to look at some of the deeper human needs that perhaps are not being met. And ultimately that's up to us as the individual. It's really easy to blame others, potentially, whether it's a relationship that you're in that's challenging, or circumstances like, oh, I just have to work so hard and I don't have a lot of time, and so that's my, way to wind down at the end of the day. Or maybe there's some resentments, or, other situations in your life, whether it's loss or grief, or literal pain, physical pain, those kinds of things. Of course, it's the human nature to try and kind of temper those and make them more tolerable, and that's fully understandable. But when we don't look at the deeper, like I mentioned already, kind of the shadow work underneath all of this that's driving these behaviors, even if it's like a chocolate addiction, then we're going to set ourselves up for challenge and difficulty in being successful at making changes on a regular basis, because those same desires are going to come back, or the same avoidance is going to come back if we're not really ready to look at the deeper problems. So one of the things, I think I already mentioned was kind of the idea of self-worth. If you're feeling insecure, or you're feeling like you don't have, you're not validated in some way in your life, then that's an easy place for addiction to come in, or, behavior issues that are not serving your best self. And I think too, a lot of times when we don't work on our self-worth and our value as a core issue, then we don't feel worthy of making those changes, or we self-sabotage when we start making those changes and have a little bit of success. We take a week off from something and then it's like, well, and that deeper self-worth is the thing that doesn't keep you going on the track you're going, because you don't feel that deeper sense of worthiness. I don't deserve to be healthy, for example. So I think it's important to really take a look at those patterns and what that represents for you. One of the other things I hear and have seen in my own life too is when we don't have purpose or that higher calling or that meaningful creativity in our lives, then a lot of times addictions fill that void too, because they easily numb it out. They help us forget that we haven't really found a meaningful thing where we can share our God-given gifts to other people. And so that's a bigger one, of course, because it takes some sitting with, because sometimes, people are stuck in a job that they feel like isn't their higher calling, or using their gifts in a way that feels meaningful to them. So, I'm not saying, you up and quit and just uproot your life, but we do have the choice in a lot of ways, even if it does feel daunting, to make changes in that direction. It doesn't mean you do it overnight, but perhaps you figure out a way to kind of find what calls you and what your passion is and what your gifts are, and start moving and taking steps in that direction, so that this isn't the end all be all for you, your 9 to 5 that you don't totally love. Connection with others, with ourself. I mentioned that a little bit with the self-worth, but finding that connection with ourselves, who we are, connection with others and community around us. And also, I really recommend connecting with something bigger than yourself. Of course, that looks like a lot of different things for different people, but getting in touch with that, well, I call it God, of course, but whatever that looks like for you, whether it's being out in nature and feeling something bigger than yourself, some sort of higher power than you. The advantage of that is a millionfold, but it ultimately will help with the other two things that I've already mentioned, the self-worth and our connection, and also that higher calling purpose. So it really kind of rounds out this bigger picture for you. So getting right with God, whatever that looks like to you. And then, of course, we are creatures who need some safety and security, but we also need freedom in addition to that. And a lot of times the safety and security, although it is a human need for sure, we need our roof over our heads and food and predictability, not chaos, but it also is driven by fear as well. And so we have to kind of get to that underlying emotion that is driving those needs. Making changes is hard because we don't want to let go of that safety and security, even if it's something that's damaging to us, because it means looking at some things that might be hard to observe about ourselves and getting really deeply honest and truthful with ourselves. It requires humility. It requires some discomfort, and it ultimately requires courage, which, by the way, is kind of the root of freedom, because making changes in our life that give us more freedom, whether that's financially, with our health, our health is deeply tied to our freedom and longevity, potentially. In relationships, having that perfect balance of some independence, but also connection. So it takes a lot of courage to make change. And it doesn't mean that you have to jump in, 2 feet first and expect everything to be perfect and change overnight. But these small steps require looking at some of the deeper underlying issues. Otherwise, it's super easy for our brain to trick us into believing those old ways of thinking, that I'm not good enough, or that I have no purpose in this life, or that I'm just one human being flying around on this rock in the middle of space, without that deeper connection to something bigger than ourselves. So as we start this new year, and as you probably have a list of things that you really want to work on, and I want you to be successful, the better you are, the better the rest of us are, for sure. So just remembering that it's time to take a little bit of a deeper look at why. Why do you make the choices that you do? What is your relationship with whatever that behavior is that's somehow stimulating something good or filling a void or giving you some emotional endocrine stimulus that you like, that numbs out the rest of the things that are challenging. So, for some people that means finding a good practitioner to do some of the deeper shadow work and counseling, or, there's tons of different options out there, EMDR and even just community groups, those kinds of things. For serious addictions, obviously I highly recommend that you get some professional support in that, because it's hard. It's really hard. For me, although I could easily say that I wasn't an addict, when I look back now after 3 years, I recognize that I definitely used alcohol for a lot of the reasons I just mentioned. And so it was habitual for sure. And in my opinion now, there was an addiction for sure. So it was easy for people around me to say, oh, you didn't have that big of a problem with it compared to other people potentially. But it certainly was negatively affecting my life and my choices, certainly big time affecting my health and my relationships. So both to myself and to others. And I will say, when you get on the other side of things and get some time under your belt, life gets pretty good. Like, I still am noticing benefits after all this time. Noticed a lot of benefits obviously in the beginning, and relationships have shifted for me in a lot of ways, but the ones that have come into my life because I made that choice have been so deeply rewarding. And I'm so grateful and lucky and blessed with them. So it can be scary, and relationships do change, I will tell you, especially when we remove alcohol. Our society is very centered around it, although I do feel this kind of shift in a lot of people recognizing that it's challenging and toxic to our bodies. So I'm not trying to be preachy. Everybody's on their path, and there's plenty of people who do it kind of well, and keep it super minimum and have a good relationship with it. So I'm not saying you have to choose my path by any means, but I just wanted to kind of give this broad reaching idea about making any sort of change, whether it's the gym or food choices or meditation and or prayer every day, just to encourage you about looking deeper at why those things don't stick. So do the deeper work. It's not easy, but it is totally worth it, and it will make you much more successful in all of the changes you want to make. Of course, if you want to reach out to me, I am happy to support you in any way that I can, and there's lots of people around who are in your same boat, so don't feel alone in any of your endeavors. Wishing you all the best. Stay healthy, happy, free, and immersed in your life. And I hope this year brings many of us together in a much beautiful, deeper way and elevates our consciousness as a whole. So, wishing you a happy 2025. Take care.